I'm here to speak about the meaning of nature, which is obviously a very huge topic in 30 minutes. So I'll probably mostly say something about how we could view nature ethically, because there is a meaning out there independent from us. But I try to make a plan, so I'll start by saying just a little bit about ethics, which is my professional discipline. One I find that many people are sort of interested in. It's like sort of nice, warm, exciting, you do ethics, right? If you say work for the tax authorities, I would think people would be more aggressive when you meet them, but people are very positive. And I think that's because ethics is one of these words which has been totally eroded. So we basically just put into it what we like, and then it's a nice word because there's things in it we like. Like sustainability. Haven't met anyone past 20 years who were against sustainability. We have very different ideas of what should happen. Or a good meal, also a good concept. Never met anyone who said, no, I would like a bad meal instead. Right? But we have very different opinions on what is a good meal than what's the content of it. So just a little bit on ethics, then something about the current physical situation in the Anthropocene, something about the concept of nature and the conflicts we have of talking about that, because we have so very different understanding of it, and then just a brief outline of how we could try to view nature in the current situation to help us just a little bit. But beginning with ethics, it's interesting that very few of us actually think about ethics, even though we talk about it all the time. Usually we just act. When I come into a room and meet people, I just say hello. If it's someone I'm supposed to know, I say hello and hand out my hand. If someone falls over, I go and help them up and so on. And I don't reflect ethically on how should I treat you. Should I yell at you, defecate on the floor and walk away now? It's not really a reflection where I have to say no, because that would probably be bad in some sense. Would that be against the rights of these human beings? I just don't do it, because I've been taught not to. I've been socialized to behave in a certain way. So when things happen around me, I just act without thinking. If I, in a second, fall over, lie on the floor, bleeding out my ears, what will you do? Please answer quickly. This one? Help me, thank you. There's one. Good. Call 112, right? Put me in double upright NATO position, heart massage, and breathing in my mouth, things like that. You'll help me. You won't have a discussion looking at each other saying, are we ethically obliged to help the speaker in this situation, right? Will Mickey Gjerris in the long run be a positive contribution to the Danish society, or would it be better if he left the planet right now? We just help. It's different when we go to the metro station, just up here, and you find someone lying on the stairs there. If they're in a suit, nice briefcase, right? You probably go and check if they're all right. But if you can both see and smell that it's a drunk homeless person, you might pass by, right? And we don't really think about it. But sometimes it's very hard not to think about ethics. Now, I brought a picture of the male brain and what goes on in there. I actually found the one on the female brain funnier, but I didn't dare to bring it. So I thought it would be better to sort of expose men instead, as I am partly a man at least. So we don't think about ethics. We think about a lot of other things, and then we just act. But sometimes we are all forced to become ethicists, you can say. Sometimes we can't avoid it, even though we try. And that there are two situations especially. And one is when we experience at least an apparent discrepancy between what we find is right, our own ideals, and then what we actually do. Anyone in here have that experience, that there's sometimes a difference between what you say and what you do? Few, good, rest must be angels. This situation, which is happening right now and has been happening at least since I went to school. And I remember they took the whole school, 700 children, to the gymnastic area, and we had to draw a color, so we got either blue or red. And if you were blue, you were first world country. There were 50 of those, so they sat in one end of the gymnasium eating a nice meal. And all those of us who got a red one, we sat in the back eating rice. So we could be taught about the injustice of the world. It actually, or apparently didn't work, because the world still looks like this, right? We have 800 million people in the world living in hunger, running the risk of chronic disease, mental disabilities, and death. And we have about 1.5 billion people in the world living in so much luxury that it's actually damaging their health, right? We are basically living in luxury and they're dying of hunger. I'm right now contemplating how I can find an ethical explanation for why I should buy a new iPhone, which is very annoying because I would like a new iPhone. But when I then give talks and show this picture, I sort of reflect in the back, I can't really do that, right? 10,000 kroner for a piece of equipment that can do exactly the same as this one, right? Those 10,000 kroner could make a huge difference for these humans, right? And it will just add on to my sort of feeling a couple of days, and then I will be tired of it and look for something new to buy. Because this is an ethical issue, right? Do I actually have the right to live in luxury while others die of hunger? Usually, I'm very good at forgetting this, right? Probably won't think about it tonight and go in and order a new iPhone. But sometimes it's very hard not to think about it. And there we can go two ways. We can either try to justify this, try to figure out how can we sort of make a claim that this is okay. It's not my fault they're dying of hunger, right? I didn't do it. It's sort of globalist capitalism something, right? Or it's their own problem, right? I'm not responsible for them. And we are already too many humans on the planet, so it's actually a good thing that we get sort of some of them out of the way and they could just get up and build societies like the rest of us because we deserve our luxury. Or I can say there's something completely wrong and I have to change the way I live, which then is where it becomes very uncomfortable to do ethics, and you usually try to forget it, turn on the television, drink a beer and hope you can forget about it and go and buy the iPhone. So that's one place where we do ethics. And the other place is when we're not quite sure what to do. When we have a sort of idea of what our values are, but we don't know how to apply them to a certain situation. When we, for instance, learn that 15% of all human-made climate gas emissions comes from the production of meat, milk, and egg, and that the easiest way to reduce your personal climate impact is to change your diet towards a vegan diet. What should you do when you go and order the next sandwich? And what should we do as a society? Could we force people not? Could we ban meat? Right? We almost banned cigarettes now. And that's interesting because first we banned cigarettes sort of for the sake, I can't smoke right now because that would harm you, right? But it's also becoming harder for me to go out there and smoke because it will harm me. So we are actually making legislation to protect me from myself. So could we make legislation here where we would protect other people from our choices? Or could we tax meat? Or should we just sort of nudge people? Or should we just say, no, what you eat is a personal matter and nobody can interfere in that? And that's actually also an ethical discussion because whether we choose one or the other, it will be based on certain values and we have to figure out what to do. And if ethics were only sort of popping up in these sort of extreme situations, people dying of hunger, climate change, it would be nice. But as the Danish theologian K.E. Løgstrup said all the way back in 1956, we are actually always involved in ethical situations. We are always in situations where we have to think about what we do. And he wrote in his book, The Ethical Demand, an individual is never involved with another human being without having in her hand some of the other person's life. We are each other's world and destiny. With our bare attitude towards each other, we shape the life worlds of each other. This phenomena is highly disturbing. And it's highly disturbing because to Løgstrup, you can say that the basic relation between humans is a relation of interdependence. We depend on each other. What I do affects you and vice versa. And if it was only that, it wouldn't be disturbing because then it would be a matter of having the most power, right? If I have power, I have opportunities. But to Løgstrup, power comes with responsibility because I'm not free to use the power I have sort of whatever my goals would be. I should always use it to further the goals of the other person. And that's where it becomes disturbing, that we have all this responsibility in every encounter with other human beings. Even when you go home from here, right? And you're thinking, oh, nice day, I'd like a cup of coffee. And you go and turn on the kettle and you're creating climate change, right? Why not just have lukewarm water, right? I know it's a very small drop in a very large ocean, but you are actually doing something. So we're always faced with this responsibility, and at the same time we are... I don't need a network, bloody machine. At the same time, we're at the mercy of others, right? They have some part of our lives in their hands. They decide how our lives would be, which can be sometimes comforting when you look around a room like this, and you feel in good company and with responsible people who will surely help you, and other times it can make you nervous that these are the kinds of people that my life depend on. So ethics is basically everywhere, entails an enormous amount of responsibility and very complex thinking about what should I actually do to make these values come true in the real world. And then I haven't even mentioned the great debates we have on which values are the right ones that we should try to further in the world. And that's problematic in the situation that we have begun calling the Anthropocene, which is a geological concept saying that human beings now affect the planet in a way so it will be measurable on a geological scale. So when people in a billion years begin, or post-people begin digging through layers of ground, they will find a certain period and they will find, oh, there were humans there. Well, let's call it the Anthropocene, right? That was where they were the most influential force on the planet. And whether this started with the Industrial Revolution or the first experiment with an atomic bomb, we can debate that for a long time, but what's very visible when we look around the planet is that we have an extreme impact today. There's no area of the planet that isn't impacted by human beings. If you go to the North Pole and dig down through the snow and ice, you will find heavy metals from human emissions even when you go down 30 meters. Not even there can we sort of find a place where humans haven't been. Another way to measure it is the so-called Earth Overshoot Day, which is basically the day where we have spent the resources that the Earth is able to produce within 12 months. And just as your bank account, sort of the ideal is that you haven't spent the resources that you have until the end of the month or the end of the year. So ideally, Earth Overshoot Day should be on the 31st of December, right? But the problem is that we are now using our resources much earlier. So if you look at the graph, you can see that in 2017, we were at August 2nd. There were no more resources left. Or there were, we could drag them out of the system, but the system wouldn't be able to replace them afterwards. So we're basically living on loans and using too much money or too much resources. And if we should have resources enough for the current way of existing on the planet, we should have 1.7 planets resources to put into the system. Then the planets would be able to regenerate. Danes are some of the worst. If everybody on the planet were to live like we do, we would need 3 to 3.5 planets resources to uphold the way we live. So basically what we're doing is we're taking things out of the system that aren't there in the long run, and that's obviously problematic. So living in the Anthropocene actually only complicates this idea of the ethical demand that we are responsible, that we are having something of the other's lives in our hands and we should think about what we do with it. Because our actions now have so far-reaching consequences in time and space that it's very hard to figure out what should I do. It's very easy for me to understand I shouldn't hit you, right? That's sort of not something I have to contemplate very long. But should I eat a steak, even though I know that that will, in a very small sense, but real sense, contribute to climate change that will damage people, perhaps in another country, perhaps in 50 years. Where's my responsibility in that? So what do I actually owe to people who live far away or who aren't here yet? Future generations, which is a weird concept somehow. Right? They aren't here. They haven't been, we don't know who they'll be. We don't know who will mate and make them, right? So they're just an idea, but we still have this sense that we owe them, right? The whole idea of sustainability is to leave the planet in a way so they will have the same opportunities as us, even though they're not there. And perhaps Groucho Marx was right when he said that he didn't sort of care about future generations because they never did anything for him. That could be a way of looking at it. On the other hand, we usually don't only do things for people who can do something for us. If it was like that, we would just go out to old nursery homes and kill everyone with dementia, right? They can't really do anything for us anymore. Waste of time and money. But we don't, because we actually respect them and try to treat them humanely, because we think we owe it to them ethically. And in that sense, we can also owe things to future generations. But what and how much? And what if we look at the rest of Earth's community? What about animals? What do we owe to animals? What do I owe to a polar bear that is right now losing its hunting field because of global warming? Or to the production animals we keep in cages? Or to the worms, which is actually the new production animals, right? Eating insects is becoming the new black. A lot of researchers are looking into how can we replace the animal protein we eat today, mostly from mammals or birds, with insect protein, because we can produce that in a more sustainable way, which means it has a less environmental impact. But what do we owe to insects, right? Do insects have welfare? Cricket welfare? Well, people laugh. I did that the first time I heard about it. I thought it was silly. I remember seeing a video of a cricket mating crickets, and another insect was eating the hind leg of the male cricket, and it just kept on mating. I was thinking only teenage boys and crickets will do this, right? So how can we talk about insect welfare? Well, we can try to examine it, and what turns out is that actually hardly anyone did, right? We didn't really look into it. And when you ask researchers why not, they say, but I don't know how to ask. I mean, I can sort of identify with a dog and a cow. I have certain physiological things I can look at. I don't know how to see cricket welfare. But what if they have welfare, right? Can we then replace one cow with, I don't know how many crickets it takes to replace the protein, 1 million crickets? So we have now 1 million animals having bad welfare and intensive production system instead of one cow. Life becomes very complicated when you do ethics, usually. And I haven't even mentioned plants yet. Do we owe plants anything? Can we do whatever we want with plants? Are they just resources, or are they also beings with a sort of inherent value that we need to respect somehow? And those are just individual beings. What about the ecosystems? Do we owe anything to ecosystems, to things who aren't real but more sort of concepts we have, like a river? Do I owe something to a river? What's a river? Well, it's a hole in the ground. It's water that's going through it all, but it's not the same water. You can't bathe in the same river twice, as we have been told for 3,000 years. There's some individual animals and plants in it, but the river itself is basically earth that's not there, or rock that's not there, right? So how can I sort of envision that as something I should respect? Species, not just the individual polar bear, but the species of polar bear. Do I owe the species of polar bear to do something so that it can continue its existence? Can a species care about things? Is it important in some way? And all these questions we actually need to try to answer, because we are having such a huge impact on the lives of all these beings that we have to figure out whether they're just resources that we don't really need to take care of, or whether it's something we owe something. So nature, we should take care of nature. And that leads to two initial questions. What is our ethical relationship with nature? Is it a resource, or is it a community, to sort of phrase two outliers of opportunities? And that leads to the question, well, what is nature? What to take care of? Well, one thing that's very certain, is that nature is very popular. I don't know if you noticed, but nature is doing well. I checked it because I went on Google and I searched porn, and I got 1.8 billion hits, and then I searched nature and I got 2.8 billion hits. So nature must be extremely popular. And when you go and look at the pictures you get when you write nature on Google, you get these wonderful pictures which have basically one thing in common. There's no humans on them, right? There's just one there. There's a road going in their track. But otherwise, nature seems to be something where there are no humans. But as humans have now influenced all of nature, it means there's nothing out there to take care of anymore, which doesn't really make sense somehow, or does it? And that's where things become complicated. The Danish historian of ideas, Hans Fink, has worked a lot with the concept of nature, and I've stolen this from him. If you meet him, it's okay to steal as an academic, you just have to say you do it. So he's tried to look into different ways that we talk about nature. Nature comes from Latin nasce, meaning born or born out of. And sometimes when we say nature, we mean that which is untouched by humans, that which is independent from humans. And I bet you if I had asked you to close your eyes and envision nature, most of you would have pictures in your head of forests or mountains or rivers or the ocean, but there wouldn't be any windmills or rail tracks or cars or computers in your mind at that moment. But sometimes we don't mean that, we just mean that which isn't cultivated, sort of a forest. And then somebody comes along and says, but forests are cultivated usually, right? They're basically places where we grow timber. But we don't see it in the same way as when we look at a wheat field. But sometimes that can be, or that which is wild can be nature, that which isn't controlled somehow, which humans haven't sort of made to serve them yet. Hurricanes are nature, right? But that canal out there isn't nature, because that's actually controlled in a lot of ways to make sure that we can use it for whatever it is we have going on with it. Sometimes nature is just that which is rural. The Danish Minister of Agriculture says that he finds wheat fields to be nature, and he was laughed at a lot. But I actually think I've grown up on at Greve, sort of the western part of Copenhagen, and now I live in Hellerup, north of Copenhagen. And when I go to Jutland and stand in a wheat field, I feel very much in nature. But I do realize that if you come from the rainforest and you're placed in a wheat field, you wouldn't feel like you're in nature. It's very interesting, all these things it does. Nature can be that which is green, basically. So it's sort of just, well, non-human living beings, that's nature, it's green, there's a plant. There's actually no nature in this room, besides us, obviously. But or it can be that which is primitive and simple, that which we know, natural food, right? Like my granddaddy made it and so on. So things are natural to us if they sort of have a long history. It's natural for people at the Faroe Islands to kill pilot whales the way they do it. They have done it for thousands of years. How dare you criticize it? Men have been raping women as long as we can look back in historical records. It's natural, right? Or it can be that sometimes when we talk about nature, we talk about nature as that which is the object of natural science. So it's sort of the physical world. And there are a long list of more meanings of what nature could be. It's actually, as already the philosopher David Hume pointed out, one of the most unclear concepts that exist in the human language, right? It's one of those concepts that you can say they have a floating ontology, as Kirsten Hastrup has called it, right? You can't really fix nature and define it like natural sciences like to do, because it changes with the perspective. It's like other things. What is a human being? Is there a clear definition of that? No, there's different definitions across different fields of science and experiences. What is love? What's sustainable? What's a good meal? What is nature? We can't get a clear answer. We have to accept that it's one of those concepts that shifts all the time. So we need, basically, when we discuss nature, to be willing to understand the complexity of a concept instead of trying to conquer it and find the answer and say, this is nature, this is what we should protect. So we argue, obviously, about nature, and you can just go and look at the discussions on agriculture in Denmark. Should we have conventional or organic agriculture, and which is best for nature? Or you can go and look at people who are discussing how we should design non-agricultural landscapes. Designing landscapes, are they then nature, right? Hunters usually say that they love nature and what they do protect nature, but what they do is they design landscapes where the animals they like to hunt have a good chance for surviving until the hunter comes. So is that nature or not? We can debate that long time. But we still like it, right? In our everyday speak, we like nature, and if people can show us something is natural, we are more inclined to buy it, which is why almost all milk commercials look like this. Very few cows get outside anymore. I think it's in Denmark, it's less than 20% of the cows that ever leave the stable. But nonetheless, this is sort of natural and nice. But you can debate how natural milk is, obviously, if you look at it from another perspective. And that's why we're discussing all the time. So what do? We have this vague concept of nature. We have this very large knowledge that we are affecting it very, very negatively. And we have this vague notion that we should take care of it. And we're not doing anything, right? So we are in the situation where we are creating climate change, desertification, and weather events that don't only threaten humans, but also other species. We know what's going on. And even though people can claim that there's a lack of knowledge about details and there's some scientific uncertainty and so on, my claim would be that even when the way we consume is clearly an expression of shameless gluttony, we continue by and large as if nothing's happening. It's Christmas soon, right? Just sort of think forward to Christmas lunches, the amounts of food you will eat that will make you feel sick. And some of you have perhaps already started worrying, what do I give my dad for Christmas? Right? The man who has everything, what should I give him? Nothing is usually not the answer we come up with, right? So why do we do this? Why have we ended up in a situation where we, as it says in Fight Club, buy shit with money we buy shit we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like? Why did we end up there when we are so brilliant and intelligent and dreaming of being post and transhuman at some point? And there's a lot of explanations when you go through the literature. There's this sort of techno-fetishism that plagues us, right? That we're sort of like, oh, we'll think of something. We know there's problems right now, but tomorrow we'll think of something. There's been the opening debate in the Danish parliament today. Climate change is not something Danish politicians talk much about, but when they do, they always say, well, we'll figure something out about energy and transportation and then it'll go away, right? We'll think of something. Very optimistic. We fear it. If we begin understanding the consequences of what we're doing, it can be almost impossible to encompass the amount of species we are eradicating from the surface of the planet. Biologists say that right now we are performing a mass extinction of species, right? We run the risk that more than 80% of all species on the planet right now will die out because of what we're doing. It's very complex. What should I do? When should I do it? How should I do it? And why should I do it? Because the consequences are so far away, right? And my neighbor isn't doing it, right? So I realize the problem, I realize what we should do, but it doesn't help that I stop. It will just be a drop in the ocean. So obviously I will do something, but only when everybody else is doing it, right? We need political solutions. And then I go and vote for politicians who don't like to talk about climate change. And perhaps the most important reason is we are afraid that we will lose out on the good life. That the changes in lifestyle that are needed right now, we see them as a sacrifice we have to bring. We have to sacrifice ourselves for nature and polar bears and climate and so on. But we would rather continue to live in this hyper-materialism we have gotten used to. So we try to live in willed blindness, as J.M. Coetzee calls it. Simply try to forget what we know so we can continue dreaming about a new iPhone. This is very much to do with anthropocentrism, the idea that nature is only a resource and that what we should do is that we should take care of ecosystem services. The problem is that that leaves in a situation where it's prudence versus hedonism, right? Should I look at what I want right now, or should I look at the long-term consequences for the human race? Usually hedonism wins, right? So the pragmatic argument against anthropocentrism is it doesn't seem to work, right? It doesn't seem that if we only view the world as a resource, that we are actually able to take good enough care of it to ensure that the basic conditions for human existence as we know it can continue. But there's also a philosophical discussion that anthropocentrism is the wrong understanding of who and what belongs to what we could call the ethical community. So we have this narrow self inside us, and I've stolen this from the Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss, right? Where we sort of destroy, pollute, change, kill, forget, neglect, instrumentalize, or disregard nature. And we hurt ourselves, both physically, we undermine our own existence, but we also lose a lot of aesthetic pleasures from our common life, right? We lose biodiversity that could have given us pleasure by looking at it or participating with it. And then we basically also hurt a lot of others, animals and plants, as you mentioned, and then the question is, do we really owe something to them, or is it just a problem because we could have used them? But we continue to go back to we will need to sacrifice hedonism and be prudent, and we're not good at that. So Arne Næss suggests we should try to look at ourselves as not only being the narrow self, the individual self, but also an ecological self. See ourselves as part of a larger community. There's some writers here that you could go and look at. David Abram, an American philosopher, who says we are evolutionary hard and soft wired to live in very close contact with nature, because that's actually our home. It's not a place where we were once. Our brains and bodies and minds are still in need of being there to both perform and to make us feel good. Or Gjerris Glendinning, who sees Western culture as an addiction. So she's written a book called My Name is Gjerris and I'm in Recovery from Western Civilization, where she says what we need to do is we have to meet that which is different from ourselves, but also part of ourselves, to become who we can become, fully human. This is where we live, the famous pale blue dot picture. A bit closer up. It's amazing that we can take this for granted, right? That we can actually stand in a queue in a supermarket and be upset about there being 7 persons in the queue, when we live on a rock covered with life in an endless universe. But we do. This is just sort of, it's nice to look at, right? But it's actually there. We've actually grown out of the same processes. We share many of the same conditions with these beings. And I think that the solution lies in trying to remember that, right? Trying to find what ethics of nature would say, the true value of nature. That we can actually be reminded of something that's important to us. We can find our own wilderness. Stop being these control freaks running around with wearables and iPhones and computers and calendars and thinking that this should be sort of a life where we set a goal and then we get there. Being reminded that being alive is experiencing what's happening to you and not planning it. So teach us how to live in the web of life, try to appreciate things, to live in awe, and from that awe can grow respect. Notice that nature is everywhere. That nature isn't wilderness in Norway, and when you go back from your vacation, you are in culture. Nature is right outside. I can see living beings from here, right? There's a tree there, that's nature. And there's human beings around you, they're nature. We just have to look behind the sort of thin layer of culture to find nature in us and relate to it. That also gives us a chance from dying of boredom in a narcissistic universe, I would say. I mean, we are watching TV shows all the time. There's an amazing planet right out there, and we are looking into screens to see how some king in an invented universe can conquer another king, right? And then we write about it in the newspapers, what happened to those invented kings, right? It's amazing how bored we must be when they can make us do it. So try to live in wonder, amazement, and respect. And that now I think I connect to something you said, and that's the last thing. Try to live in what you could call respectful disharmony with nature. Because there's no harmony. We will have to kill to live. That's a tragedy of life. We can't do anything about that. That's a basic condition of it. But we could try to say, okay, let's try to see how little we can damage while living, instead of sort of presuming that everything out there is only there for our pleasure and we have the right to fulfill every preference that arises in our mind as soon as possible. As the American eco-poet Gary Snyder says, nature is not a place to visit, it is home. Thank you.